All right, let's just get right into it. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to objectively map out a deeply complex, highly charged political commentary that was recently broadcast on Sky News Australia. Today we're unpacking an interview that dives headfirst into some of the absolute most polarizing issues out there right now. Political leadership, the real impact of immigration, and these rapidly escalating fears around the safety of Jewish communities across the Western world. Now, to be clear, our goal here isn't to take a side. We're just here to unpack exactly what these speakers are arguing and how they connect these massive, heavy concepts.
So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. First up, leadership and core values. Then, immigration and assimilation concerns. Third, we'll look at the state of England. Fourth, the Jewish experience today. And we'll wrap up with redefining Western democracies.
All right, kicking things off with part one, leadership and core values.
So the speakers start their whole argument by establishing a baseline. Before they even get into what they think is going wrong in the world, they first establish what they see as the absolute bedrock of a strong society. The broadcast explicitly defines true leadership as being totally, inextricably linked to the fierce defense of Judeo-Christian values. They frame these values as the very foundation of Western democracy. And, they actually point straight to Donald Trump as their prime example of this. In their view, regardless of what else he gets called by his critics, he's a figure who unapologetically sticks to these core principles. And they argue that this kind of unyielding stance is exactly what the West is missing right now, and what it desperately needs.
Which brings us to part two, immigration and assimilation concerns.
From that foundation of core values, the interview makes a really sharp pivot to what the speakers identify as the primary existential threat to these Western societies. The hosts argue that Western nations, and they include Australia in this, are being actively and purposefully undermined. They describe this ongoing process where countries are importing populations who don't just refuse to assimilate into democratic norms, but who actually harbor outright hostility toward Western values. And they use incredibly strong language here. They literally refer to it as an overarching strategy of gutting nations from the inside. According to the interview, this massive demographic and cultural shift is being heavily facilitated by leftist open-door policies. Basically, they claim these policies are practically holding the gates wide open for people who actively want to dismantle Western democracy.
Moving right along to part three, the state of England. To really vividly illustrate these macro-level claims, the guest zeroes in on the United Kingdom, presenting modern-day England as this terrifying, contemporary cautionary tale for the rest of the West. They pull out a really specific statistic. The Muslim population in England is currently only around 6%. So what does this actually mean? Well, their argument is that the real crisis isn't a matter of simply being statistically outnumbered by immigrants. The underlying issue, they argue, is something way more systemic.
Instead of raw demographics, they argue the real problem is institutional capture. The guest really hammers home this one quote saying, "It's not a matter that they've been overrun, it's that the leadership has been cowed to a point." So according to the interview, those left-wing policies we just talked about haven't just opened the borders. They've created a whole leadership class across public institutions that completely lacks the backbone to address these cultural tensions. They argue that leaders have just become way too intimidated to actually govern or protect their foundational culture.
And because of this allegedly paralyzed leadership, the guest lays out a stark, almost apocalyptic binary for England's future. He says it's either going to become the first Islamic country of Europe, or it's going to descend into total civil war. The speaker states flat out that he sees absolutely no third option here. And that's fundamentally because he has zero confidence in the current leadership's ability or even willingness to turn the ship around.
Okay, part four, the Jewish experience today. Now, having established this broad narrative of civilizational decline, the explainer zooms in from those big macro politics to the agonizing emotional fears rippling through the Jewish community right now. To highlight this, the broadcast shares a truly harrowing anecdote. They reference an interview with a Jewish man who, and this is just wild, was literally giving a tour at Auschwitz when he heard about a recent terror attack in London. His reaction was just immediate panic. He describes going onto his family WhatsApp group, getting videos of the aftermath, and physically zooming in on the bodies and the clothes on his screen, just desperately trying to see if his own family members were among the victims. The guest points out that this intense, visceral anxiety isn't an isolated incident. It's a shared, daily reality for Jewish communities today.
The speakers then draw a direct, sobering line straight from the historical trauma of the Holocaust right to this exact moment in time. The guest shares that his own grandparents, all four of whom survived the Holocaust, by the way, always warned him that this kind of virulent hatred could return. He openly admits he used to just brush those warnings off. But he notes that it wasn't even just the tragic attacks of October 7th that changed his mind. It was October 8th.
It was watching the world's reaction to those attacks that made him realize his grandparents were right all along. Today, he says, Jewish families sitting around dinner tables are having the exact same desperate, fearful conversations about fleeing that their ancestors had back in 1935.
And finally, Part 5, Redefining Western Democracies.
So the interview zooms back out to ask, what does this targeted hostility actually mean for the stability of the West as a whole? The crucial point the speakers make here is that this isn't just about anti-Semitism. They see it as a broader assault on the West itself. They argue that Jewish communities are simply the tip of the iceberg, or, as they put it, the low-hanging fruit for groups that are hostile to Western democracy. Because of this, they totally reframe the geopolitical landscape. They argue that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's conflict with Hamas isn't just about protecting Jews. They frame it as a frontline defense of Western civilization against people who want to destroy it. Meanwhile, they argue that domestic democratic leaders, like Keir Starmer in the UK, for example, are offering nothing but hollow words and completely failing to provide actual protection for their citizens.
This leads the guests to seriously question if places like Europe even retain Western values anymore. They contrast the Western values of yesterday, which they define as genuine freedom and robust protection of citizens, with our modern reality. A reality where states are incredibly quick to jail citizens for offensive social media posts, yet simultaneously fail to protect minority Jewish families from actual violence and imported extremism on the streets. They describe this as a fatal paradox, basically a society that has become completely tolerant of the intolerant. And that brings us to the interview's ultimate, provocative warning. The guest points out that Jewish families who actually have the means to do so are already starting to pack up and leave places like England. So we'll leave you with the question they pose to their audience. If history is any guide, what happens to a civilization when its Jewish population is forced to leave? According to the speakers we've analyzed today, this exodus is not just a tragedy for one single community. It's a dark historical omen signaling the impending demise of the broader civilization itself. Thanks for joining us on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.